A couple of weeks ago we had a supermoon, one of those big full moons that photographers really enjoy taking striking pictures of. I took a picture of it, it's this one, and it got quite a lot of interest. I think there are a couple of useful points about the choices I made in taking and composing and editing the photo. So firstly, the camera. I used this is a Nikon, it's the only Nikon in my collection, and it can do this. A zoom function that lets you take pictures of things that are really very far away. Where I think it gets interesting is after that, when we look at composition choices and editing the image. So let's copy over and open up the raw file from the camera. And the first thing we see is that it's not that interesting. It's largely neutral white image, roughly filling the frame. But there's something down on the bottom right hand corner that catches my eye. Right on the boundary between the moon and the dark sky, you can actually see where the shadows fall on the craters. You can see the height of the craters, and that, for me, is fascinating. So I'm going to make that the heart of this image. And that's really the first point to take away from this piece. Find the visually interesting part of your image and then work around that. So for me, it's those mountains at the edge. So turning to the edit now, the first thing I'm going to do is look at contrast. And I use this dehaze filter. Dehaze is a way of giving you a very boosted, very exaggerated brightness and darkness contrast effect. And that, if we pull the highlights down a little, make it a little warmer, that's giving me the sort of effect that I want for this moon. Okay. So that's really the bulk of the exposure and the contrast editing, just with those couple of sliders. And now I turn my thoughts towards composition. Where do I want the eye to be drawn with this image? Well, obviously the mountains at the edge. And I've got my eye on this for Instagram, so I'm going to take this down to a 1:1 square crop. Okay, that's quite nice. Composition for me is the art of arranging the foreground, the background, the elements within it in pleasing patterns and in pleasing arrangements. So I put it into a square, but it's not quite pleasing enough for me. Let's open it up in Photoshop and give it a bit more room. So let's expand the black space that the moon sits in. It's very easy to do that. And now we've got more room to make a more pleasing crop within that. So with a tiny bit of cleaning up and uploading to Instagram, that's the job done. So just to recap, the two things that really make the image stand out are finding the interesting part of it, even if it's just a small part of it, and then working around that. And you don't have to show the whole of the thing you're photographing in the photograph. It's a very basic point, but it's one of the most interesting. It's a bit like one of my other favourite photography phrases, which is, if you want to make something look interesting, don't light all of it. But of course the really smart way of taking a picture of the moon is to put it in some context, and for that you really need an ephemeris. That's a map or an app that helps you understand where you are and where the sun and moon will rise and set to help you get those amazing photos of the moon rising behind a certain building or landmark. I had fun with one last week, helping me to find exactly the right place for the sunset while out on my exercise, of course.